Greetings, welcome to the Pandemic Podcast. Here I am in Bristol still, you'll see, not at the Medical Freedom March in London, on the basis that today, this weekend, is only 5 days away from my wife's due date, due to have our son soon, so I didn't want to take the risk of going to London in the event that she goes into labour. So I have this live footage now from London at the Medical Freedom March taking place through the streets, I believe close to Clapham Common here now. You can see, as always, with the London marches, very carnival atmosphere, very upbeat, fantastic atmosphere. I've spoken to my team on the ground. We tried to get them on the screen to do a live interview, but the signal wasn't strong enough. But hopefully bring some footage later on over the weekend direct from my team. I've also got people from the Together Declaration crew on the ground there. We're going to try and bring them across. Just sounds like a fabulous day out. I think people are somewhat critical of protests, and they ask you what value do they have, what change do they make. To me, it's about boiling the frog. We recognise that the protests don't necessarily immediately change policy, but they send a signal not only to policymakers and the government that there is a sizable proportion of society that is unhappy with a particular issue, in this case the issues around vaccine passports and vaccine mandates, the subject of today's march in London, the Medical Freedom March, but also not only sending that message loud and clear, send a message to the public as well, showcasing that their fellow citizens are taking issue with these important matters. And then ultimately, thirdly, for protesters who are joining for the first time, it's really a vessel to make people realise that they are not alone, because many of us in our individual communities, in our different areas, we may be concerned about what we're witnessing, we may be worried about the different policies that we're seeing in response to COVID-19, but perhaps don't have a way to communicate or express ourselves if we're not surrounded by like-minded people. So when people go to a protest like this, as you can see, you are surrounded by like-minded people who are aligned with the same cause as you. And one of the most powerful things about that, firstly, is it gives you assurance that you're not alone, and that you many others feel similarly about the issues that you feel strongly about. But also, history has shown that protest movements like this, when someone begins to attend protests for the first time, they become politically active more generally. And again, historically, what that's led to is then people taking more interest in wider issues, bigger problems as they emerge, and people become more likely to take action against political or social issues that they care strongly about. So there is great merit, I believe, in the protest movement, even though it doesn't move the dial in terms of transforming policy. It's part of a consistent set of actions that can influence policy, and I call it a boiling frog because, again, it's a slow burn. These consistent actions over time, coupled with other activities, whether that be campaigning, strikes, boycotts, petitions, or things like the Together Declaration you've seen this week, potentially, if you've been following the podcast, all are vessels for making your voice heard and starting to affect change. You can see here, live drum circle, looks fantastic. What an atmosphere there is there today. Looks like a sunny day in London. It's been a beautiful sunny day here in Bristol. I've been out doing the gardening, taking care of my home, getting ready for my son to arrive. Absolutely gutted I couldn't be there myself in London. I've been to many of these marches over the last 12 months, and always a fantastic experience. And the fourth reason why I think these marches are particularly important is they are a living expression. They're a living expression of freedom, really. This whole protest movement is about medical freedom. This is live from the London Medical Freedom March. But more broadly, many of those marching today are standing for a free, fair and open society, standing up for their liberties. And as always, when people see these types of protests against medical mandates, it's important to recognise that the vast majority of people at these events are caring individuals who not only care about other people in the society that they live in, the planet they operate in, it does not mean that they don't care about the potential impacts of COVID-19. It just means they see that there's a disconnect between potentially the virus and the impacts that the virus creates, and then the public and the policy response. So it's important to make that distinction when you see protests like this. But really, you can clearly see what a beautiful atmosphere. When there is a authoritarian style leadership, which is what we've witnessed now in the UK and other parts of the world. Elements like this, when you bring the fun, you bring the noise, you bring the energy, you not only send a message, but you activate that creative, artistic, joyful expression, which in many ways is often suppressed under authoritarianism or totalitarianism. We've seen over the last 18 months the mental health crisis, the anxieties that it's brought for people. Things like this really are uplifting experiences. They're very festive experiences. And again, I was at a music festival just last weekend, and it was fantastic to be back in the music and dancing, enjoying myself with my wife. But again, you can see how much fun people are having here. And in terms of movement building, when it comes to actually attracting other people to your cause, you can get down in the doom and gloom of the issues. I was talking last night about how the kind of future projections of the fears that you may have for how the world may unfold can get you down. They can bring you down. They can emotionally and mentally take their toll. But when you go to an event like this and you're surrounded by like-minded, energetic, joyful souls, peacefully marching together, dancing, singing, having a joyous time, it's uplifting for the spirit and the soul. And to be quite frank, many of the problems that we've seen in the last 18 months have come from fear-based energy. We've seen this perpetual fear-mongering. We've seen all kinds of behavioral science used essentially to suppress the minds, emotions of the people in order to ensure that they remain compliant. But when we raise our vibration, whether you're talking about a protest movement or you're talking about a business idea or anything really, when you can bring that energy, that love, that joy, that passion, it's in those moments. Here's Louise. Here's Louise from Save Our Rights. Fantastic. Raising the vibration. When we're in a positive state of mind, when we're in a higher state of vibration, when we're in a higher state of consciousness, whether it's tackling an issue like this or building a business or any creative endeavor, our chances of actually making better quality decisions in those environments, when our physiology is strong, when our mind is sharp and our emotions are uplifted, that's when we can really start to create really compelling solutions. And right now the world needs solutions. And in this energy, not only does it attract other people to join the movement, because after 18 months of feeling suppressed and isolated, they can see that there are people out there having fun. There are people out there wanting to make a difference in the world. It's just a beautiful opportunity to be around like-minded souls. So this is live footage from the Medical Freedom March in London today. To recap, unfortunately I couldn't be there myself, commentating live from Bristol because my wife is due to give birth in the next 5 days. I couldn't risk travelling to London. As much as I'm 100% committed to this message and this cause, I'm not sacrificing the birth of my own son for this cause. We all have our boundaries. Not there today, but I have my team on the ground and several of our fellow campaigners from the Together Declaration are also there sending in their reports. So as you can see, a wonderful day there. To recap, the march today is all about medical freedom. What is medical freedom all about? We've seen, obviously, to tackle the issues relating to COVID-19, the launch of these different vaccines. And I'm not going to talk about the efficacy or safety of those interventions here on this particular podcast, but as a result of those vaccines, we've seen the rise of vaccine passports, which are really a discriminatory measure, where we're already seeing where they've been deployed in different parts of the world. We're seeing people being excluded from hospitality, people being excluded from travel, people unable to access basic goods, basic services, being turned away. And this really is not acceptable in the modern world. We know that during a crisis, there is enhanced desire for safety. People want to feel secure. It's a basic human need that we always have. Looks like we may lose the footage there. Bear with me a second. That we always have. We may have lost the footage here. Leave that there for a minute. But safety and security is always a human need anyway, outside of a crisis. But where there is a crisis, people have a heightened sense of need. And there are always empowering and disempowering ways that we can go about meeting our needs. And we've seen in the last 18 months that there have been some empowering ways, but there have also been some very disempowering ways that people meet the need for safety. And under those conditions, governments can take advantage of that fear, that insecurity, and play that paternalistic role. That's why we've seen the rise of that kind of authoritarian type leadership. It's almost like an authoritative parent role in terms of how it interact with a naughty or bad child, so to speak. But we're not naughty children. We're not bad children. We're adults, and we're not treated as such in these types of environments. So it's important that we catch ourselves socially and individually within society when that desire for safety leads to these excess or fundamental collectivist type or more authoritarian style interventions, which we're seeing with the vaccine passports. Because we can come together to tackle the issues surrounding the virus. We all want the best for each other. No one wants one another to get sick or to lose their lives from anything. Unfortunately, death is a sad fact of life, and none of us want our lives to be cut short. So, the people at these types of protests, directly includes myself, deeply care for their fellow human beings and for society. It's not about that. It's about how we go about protecting one another. And when we start to see a crisis like this capitalized upon by those who have got alternative agendas or vested interests, such as the vaccine passports, which the protesters are protesting against today, we can see that these conditions are ripe for these types of interventions that can truly erode our long and hard-fought rights and freedoms. And you have to ask yourself, in the context of this issue of vaccine passports, do you really want to live in a society where your friends and family may be excluded from certain activities? They may be excluded from education. Your children, your grandchildren may be excluded from taking their exams or traveling with one another, or you may not be able to access healthcare or all these other things. Do you really want to live in a society where people are discriminated against, where they are excluded? No matter how afraid you are of COVID-19, you have to ask yourself, are you willing to tolerate that level of intervention, that overstep from governments into our lives? Because today it could be about a COVID vaccine, tomorrow it could be about a flu vaccine, the next day it could be about something else. We've seen in other countries, without going too far down the track, China and other nations, but if you look at the industry reports on digital identifications, it's billions of pounds worth of industry. But it's quite clear that behavioural dynamics, we live in a world where, your Fitbit will track your heart rate and we've got devices that track your emotion. Almost anything can be tracked and surveilled now. Once you give permission to the governments to start collecting sensitive personal information about you, you're on a slippery track, because all of a sudden we're seeing now a conditional society based upon one thing, medical records, around a singular vaccine. But what could it be tomorrow? And that's the problem. When you open the door under these crisis scenarios for these excess government interventions, it's very hard to take that power back. So regardless of what you think about COVID-19 or the vaccines, we have to look at this socially, culturally, and ethically, and start to make the argument that we do want to live in a free, fair and open society, and that these particular interventions are a real threat to that, and really are an ineffective means of mitigating risk. This is really, to me, when I look at it, is all about money and power and control. Digital IDs that could spill over from the back of this and all the other mechanisms, where it may seem far-fetched, other countries are already doing it. If you look at what data is being collected by the NHS app, you'll see that it's not just your vaccine status. So it's really important that we catch ourselves in a crisis like this and not allow that excess government overreach. We need a balanced set of interventions to support society, but not to erode rights and freedoms. So that's what the Medical Freedom March is about today. Firstly, the vaccine passports, but also vaccine mandates. You may have seen that coming up as employers in the care home sector are mandating vaccinations. And again, it's not about what you think about the vaccines. Think about this in terms of the winter. If you've got loved ones, family members, elderly relatives or friends who are in care, there are a lot of people within the care industry who cannot or will not take the vaccine. And as a result of that, it's going to see massive staff shortages in one of the most critical sectors going into winter season, where if there is any group that are most vulnerable from this disease, this virus, it's those in the elderly, those in care homes. Are you willing to allow a vaccine mandate like this to strip multiple employees from a sector that really is already understaffed and needs more people? Those people have made a decision about their own personal choice. They've used informed consent to either take the vaccine or not take it. But the ones that have chosen not to take it or cannot have it, for whatever reason, for some, they may fear the 1 in 100 or the 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000 or 1 in a million chance of an adverse reaction. But you cannot take that concern away, or there's a plethora of other reasons. But now this winter, the care homes are going to be understaffed. You're relying on volunteers. It could be your family member, your friend that is suffering because of this vaccine mandate. And now they're talking about vaccine mandates for teachers in schools. Schools are already stretched. There are already too many pupils per classroom with not enough teachers. Are you willing to see another sector, education, your children's education, who's been so dramatically disrupted over the last 12 to 18 months? Children have really taken the burden of that. Are you really willing to sacrifice the quality of their education? This is another area where vaccine mandates may come forward. And again, we'll see this is a coercive behavior to try and get more people to take the jab. The reality is people have made up their minds. And a certain proportion of them, yes, will take the vaccine against their wishes. But a number of people will leave. And we're leaving key sectors, care homes, education, and what next? So when you see people marching in the streets here, we've got vaccine passports, which are discriminatory. They're going to leave people excluded from society. And you've got vaccine mandates that are going to decimate certain industries or put them under a severe strain at the very least. So this march is about standing against those things. And again, going back to some of the points I've made inside of this broadcast, we cannot allow a crisis to be the tool that erodes our rights and freedoms that have been long and hard fought for by our forebearers. This is a time for change, yes, but we have to create a much more positive vision of tomorrow. We have to create a much more compassionate and loving pathway to the future, because at the moment we're living in fear and we're living in scarcity, and which is understandable when there's been a health crisis, but we've lost all context. I've reported countlessly through this pandemic how the data has been flawed, it's been inflated, and it's time that we say enough's enough. Give us proper public health information. Let us know the facts and allow people to make personal responsibility decisions based upon personal responsibility. Because we're not angry, naughty, or bad children in this paternalistic, authoritarian style leadership where effectively the state has taken the role of an authoritarian parent, and the public, the citizens, are being treated as bad or naughty children. It's time to have an adult relationship with one another and the state. And we cannot allow this particular crisis or any crisis to give excess power, because if you look at any of the interventions that have been criticised over the last 18 months, all of them, whether it's lockdowns, vaccine mandates, vaccine passports, any of these things, they're all excess government intervention. That's the common thread. So it's time to rebalance, say enough's enough, to say no to these interventions, particularly in this case, in accordance with this march. Say no to vaccine passports and say no to mandatory vaccinations, because these threaten the very social fabric of how we live. And, right now we can say no. And it's really important that we do, because once these things happen, it's very hard to undo. We've seen, there was an example of a law that was passed within a previous crisis that took something like 30 years to overturn. It's critical. We are at this unique juncture where we must catch ourselves and say no. And this is not just happening in the United Kingdom. We know this. It's happening around the world. Together we must unite. And that's why this week I was part of the launch of the Together Declaration. You may have seen I spoke in London, which is designed to say no to vaccine passports specifically. So if you couldn't make it to the protest like myself today, or you're in a different part of the world, Take the opportunity today to sign the Together Declaration. Take the opportunity to lend your voice to this, to say, we want a free, fair and open society. We don't want anyone to be left behind. We don't want to divide one another. We want to eat, learn, dance, play together. We want to recover from this together, and we're not willing to allow anyone to be left behind, and we're not willing to allow the care home sector, the education sector, or any other sector to be adversely affected by these mandates. We need to allow people to make their personal choice based upon the information, and it's time that we submit sound public information, public health information, so that people can make informed choices, not only about the vaccines, but about their approach to how they'll handle the particular risks, given the fact that of COVID-19, given that they are not uniform. We know after 18 months of post-COVID infections, hospitalization data, mortality data, that yes, anyone can catch the virus, but how severe it is dependent on often some very clear circumstances. And there's always exceptions. With the flu, if you look back through the newspaper headlines for the last 10 years, there's countless headlines of young people who have sadly succumbed to flu or pneumonia. These things are a fact of life. But if we try and eliminate all risk, we forego the right to live, and we merely exist. And I, for one, don't want to merely exist. I care deeply about my friends, family, and the society I live in, and the planet that I'm blessed to live upon. But I'm not willing to allow the simple rights and freedoms that our ancestors have created to disappear and dissipate during this response to the pandemic. So it's time to say no. If you couldn't make it to the protest today, please do sign the Together Declaration. It will take a couple of minutes of your time, and lend your voice to the campaign here to preserve your medical freedom wherever you are in the world. Now, if you're watching for the first time, thank you very much for tuning in. I just invite you to take another moment, if you will, to subscribe to the Pandemic Podcast. Broadcast 5 days a week. This is a special edition, sharing some footage. If you missed it, apologies. We had some footage from the protest march in London. Do subscribe to our show so we can keep you updated and with some future interviews. I've got some absolutely phenomenal guests coming up. Some of the most requested guests. You can maybe start to guess some of the guests that you've been asking for. The names come up over and over again. I've got some absolutely dynamite guests coming on the show in the near future. So if you want to be the first to hear about when and how you're going to watch them, and some of them are break the internet level, which means that we cannot broadcast them on social media because we may get censored. So we're going to have private Zoom conversations with some of these special guests. So please do make sure that you subscribe to the mailing list at danjgregory.com/pandemic, and you'll be able to join those special edition interviews coming up over the next few weeks. So enjoy the rest of your bank holiday weekend if you're here in the UK, and for the rest of you around the world, have a blissful weekend, and I look forward to seeing you once again next week for our next episode of the Pandemic Podcast. And I may well share some interviews with people who are at the protest earlier today, to share their views on their experience and how the day unfolded. So thanks again for tuning in. Peace and love to you all. Have a great week.